So in the scripture this morning, we pick up the story of Moses where Christina left off last week. In the previous chapter, we found Moses killing an Egyptian for abusing a Hebrew slave. The Pharaoh, who also happened to be Moses' adopted father, put a warrant out for his arrest, and Moses flees. By chapter 3, Moses has made it to the suburbs. He's made it to the suburbs of Midian. He's gotten himself married, he's gotten himself a kid, and made a comfortable life as a suburban shepherd. And this is where we find Moses minding his own business, out with his flock one day. And God comes along in a burning bush to demand that Moses drop everything he's worked for and move back to the capital city he fled to challenge the very house that he grew up in, Pharaoh's house. And the bush must have been impressive. It definitely caught Moses' eye. It was continually burning and still not consumed by the fire. But no amount of divine pyrotechnics was going to make this an easy decision for Moses, because Moses spends the better part of 2 chapters, 3 and 4, in Exodus trying to convince God that he's got the wrong person, that Moses is not the right person for the job. You heard him say, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" And this is the first of 4 times in just these 2 chapters where Moses tries to wiggle out of God's call on his life. And for those that know, he continues to do it at every step and turn. He'll say, "I'm slow of speech and not very eloquent. You need to find someone who can talk better than I." Or they'll say, "They won't listen to me." Or, "Please send someone else." Moses did what most of us do when we are called to something greater than ourselves. When something is asked explicitly or implicitly that pushes us beyond our imaginations of what we thought we were capable of doing. We demur, we self-deprecate, we try to offer alternatives to God. We say to God, "Not me, God. I have a family to think about. I have responsibilities, children to educate, parents to care for, a career to think of, a spouse who needs my love and support. Not me, God. I'm better out of the spotlight. I'm a willing worker, but I'd rather be behind the scenes. Not me, God. That's not the type of person I am. It doesn't fit the life I've built. What would my friends think? What if my employer found out I went to a church like Middle? My family didn't raise me to make waves. Who's going to listen to me, God? I'm too old for all that. Or I'm too young to be taken seriously. I haven't read enough books yet. I need some time to get all the facts straight." Or for Moses, why would they listen to me? I haven't grown up in slavery. I was raised in Pharaoh's house, privileged. Why would the Hebrews listen to me? So I say, who's going to listen to me, God? We can say, I'm too privileged to be taken seriously in the fight for justice. I'm too white, I'm too male, I'm too cisgendered, I'm too well off to talk about injustice. What do I have to say that anyone would care about? And as soon as God assures Moses that the people will listen to him, Moses finds someone else to say won't listen to him. He says, "Why would Pharaoh listen to me?" And we may ask, why would the mayor listen to me? Why would the boss listen to little old me? I'm not privileged enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not powerful enough to make any sort of difference. Those folks have their minds made up anyway, and I don't need to be wasting my time. But you'll notice God never asked Moses to change Pharaoh's heart, per se. He actually knew that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened against him. And we are always in trouble when we let the success of our justice work depend on the whims of the oppressor or Pharaoh, because Pharaoh doesn't get to decide when we win or lose. And perhaps Moses was being truthful about his speech impediment. I know I'm going to just fulfill that prophecy right now. I grew up, I could never say my own name. I had to go to therapy for a Rob. I was Wob until I was 7 or 8. Still get things mouth, so. All right, Spirit of Moses. No, Aaron, who can speak. Church joke. And so perhaps Moses was being truthful about his speech impediment, his flock, and his family's needs. And maybe his concerns were not just some lame excuse. Maybe you might even say that Moses was being modest. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to be modest. We're not supposed to gloat and brag about ourselves. But I want to say here a word about modesty. Because modesty is often really just self-preservation. Reminds me of what Dr. Maya Angelou said about modesty in an interview. She said, "You see, I have no patience with modesty. Modesty is a learned adaptation. It is stuck on like decals. As soon as life slams a modest person against the wall, that modesty will fall off faster than a G-string will fall off a stripper." She said it. It wasn't me. She said it. And Angela is kind of like Scripture, so I can't change it, you know. But she goes on, she says, "Whenever I'm around someone who is modest, I think, run like hell in all fire." You don't want modesty. You want humility. Humility comes from the inside out. It says, "Someone was here before me, and I'm here because I've been paid for. I have something to do, and I will do that because I'm paying for someone else who has yet to come." And so, God didn't have any patience. Well, he had a little bit of patience, but not much patience with Moses' modesty. The text says that God's anger was kindled towards Moses in chapter 4. Even though Moses heaps up excuse after excuse and reason why he is not the right person for the task. When he says, "I'm slow of speech," God says, "Who gives speech to mortal?" This is a sassy God. This is like just going right back at him. Who do you think made that mouth that you're complaining about? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be your mouth. I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak. God says to us, "Don't you know that I know you better than you know yourself? Do you think I need a lesson in critical race theory or capitalism and socialism to determine who I will call to be my witnesses in the world?" But Moses can't help himself. He says, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else," even after God's anger was kindled. But God does know our limits. God is not a non-discerning cheerleader. God is not that friend you call because you know they're going to say what you want to hear. It's not that friend. God is the friend you call that even though you know they will say the thing you don't want to hear, you have to call them anyway. Because God is the friend that reminds you of what you are made of and of just how far you have come. God is that friend who says, "I know you. I was there last time you tried that." God is a friend who tells you about yourself, hugs you tight, and says, "You got this." And God often asks us to do things that we are not actually capable of doing on our own. That's one of the most dangerously used scriptures, that God will not give you anything you cannot bear, because it's not necessarily that's not true, it's just the way it gets used as a way to make people feel guilty for not being able to handle some of life's struggles, because it can be hard down here. It really can. But God doesn't always ask us to do it by ourselves. It seems to me that God has a deep desire for us to be in community, to depend on one another to fulfill God's dream for us. God seems to agree with Moses, actually, that he's not very eloquent. He said, "All right, Moses, you're right, you can't talk very well." And he allows Moses' brother to be his spokesperson. In fact, to this point, before Moses met God at the burning bush, he tried this thing, doing it on his own. Last week, you may remember, he tried to soothe the suffering of the Hebrew people by taking matters into his own hands. He killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew slave. For Moses, it was one thing to make an impulsive decision to retaliate against injustice, to strike out when you see someone being abused. Moses didn't have to think twice about that decision, but it really didn't work out for him. He not only got rejected by the Egyptians and his adopted father, Pharaoh, trying to arrest him, but even the Hebrew slaves didn't respect him after that. When he tried to tell one of the other Hebrews to stop abusing a fellow Hebrew said, well, what are you going to do about it? You going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? No, individual acts. Moses may have thought his independent act was exacting justice, but it's not enough. And it's certainly not revolutionary to do only independent acts of justice and charity. Sure, it can be radical. Murder is certainly radical, but it's not just, it's not righteous, and it's not revolutionary. Moses' split-second reaction to kill the Egyptian oppressor was a cheap thrill compared to the deep work of organizing God was asking of him now at the burning bush. Now, I'm not saying individual acts of justice or charity are not valuable, but if they're not somehow connected to a larger movement in your life or in your community, to a larger mission in your life, they all too often run out of steam right quick. But when it comes to God putting a special call on Moses' life, that he will have to give up this new life in the suburbs that he's worked for, uproot the family from his wife's homeland, go back to hostile territory in Egypt, it's a different story. When it comes to betraying the life he's built with the help of his father-in-law Jethro, when it comes to betraying the house that actually raised him, Pharaoh's house, when it comes to risking embarrassment, shame, and even death, we find that Moses is all too willing to say, let's not make rash decisions, God. We see in Moses that we are called to betray love, a betraying sort of love. That life is always filled with decisions about who you are going to make happy, and you're never going to make everyone happy. In the life of faith, we are called out of our comfort zone into this type of love. Love, true love, is the most unstable and unsafe reality. Love is always changing and challenging us. If you're looking for safety, don't look for love. The first noble truth that says life is suffering, it doesn't necessarily mean that life is going to just be painful. It means that life and love is always changing. Changing. Love asks us to step beyond the convenient commitments of our life, those that would have us prioritize in concentric circles, with ourself always in the center. The commitments that we think anchor us, that give us safety, like the role of a parent, a child, a sister, a brother, a friend, a volunteer, a comforter. And even on this Labor Day Sunday, God is asking that our labor not define us, that our careers not define us, that our work not define us, our position, title, or role are not all that we are or all that we are destined to be. We can so easily lose ourselves in our jobs that we lose sight of a greater calling. What God is asking of Moses is to portray himself over to God's plan for his life. Because the word betray comes from the Latin tradere, which means to hand over. In the Old English, be, the prefix, actually means thoroughly, to thoroughly hand over. What I'm trying to get at is that this walk of faith that we've been talking about all summer, this revolutionary love, we say we are called to embody, that it comes with a cost. And unions at their best are practices of seeing that your well-being is connected to that of those all around you. That faith at its best is knowing that just because we are called doesn't mean that others aren't called as well. To know that the call on our lives does not preclude the call in other people's lives. And actually that the call is a call towards connecting ourselves to all of them. And no, you can tell that Moses doesn't need optimism. God isn't asking Moses to be optimistic about his chances. And to be honest, I'm not very optimistic right now. I think it's going to get a lot harder before it gets better in our country. And I don't need optimism necessarily. I'm a depressive, so I'm excellent at pessimism. If you bring me a solution, I'll show you all the problems with that solution. What I think we're called to more is hope. Hope that doesn't depend on optimism. Hope that depends on courage. Again, Dr. Andrews says that courage is the most important of all of these traits because without courage, we couldn't practice any of our other best characteristics. And so I believe this scripture is telling us this morning that our calling is to work, organize, teach, clean, build, govern, fix, and work in such a way that we become nothing less than the face of God. And that's an awesome task. And I know someone's going to say that's heretical up there. But God said it. In chapter 7, he says, now, another time that Moses is complaining, he says, now I have made you the God, like God to Pharaoh. That God has no faces but ours, no hands but ours. And that God is calling us to love called by love. Calling to liberating love, to betraying love, to unbind love, to seek love, teach love, organize love, to labor in love, and to be unsettled by love, challenged by love, that we may enjoy and revel in it. No, it's not all pain, but there is struggle. But what God is saying, and God is saying to Moses and all of us, that the price is worth it. Amen.